Hello guys, and welcome back to this masterclass for the beginners with JSP. So guys, in the previous lessons we talked about how to installing the environment. So it was all about setting up the environment for JSP, and we used Eclipse to include Tomcat as a server, and we created, I think, a page over there. But today we want to talk about the architecture of in JSP. So guys, without much ado, let's get started. It's your guy once again, the Wolf. Welcome once again. So in this class of today, we are not going to do much, but we will explain how we handle all these files. So let's start by defining the architecture. So guys, the web server needs a JSP engine, a container to process the JSP pages. So the JSP container is responsible for interpreting requests from a JSP page. And in this lesson, we are going to make use of Apache, which has built-in built-in JSP container to support JSP pages development. So a JSP container works with the web server to provide the runtime environment and other services as JSP needs it. So it knows how to understand the special elements that are part of the JSP. Yes. So for example, I have this diagram here. You can see it on my desktop. So this diagram actually shows the position of a JSP container and the JSP files in a web application. As you can see, we have the client here. We can have a client is where we're going to send the request from, and the container, which is JSP engine, going to receive the pages and just process our client request. So you can see the client here. We can have maybe 3 PC, just like Mac OS, Linux, and also maybe Windows. Those are the clients. So these clients, they send a request over the internet, as you can see this over here, this internet, and maybe using HTTPS protocols. And the web server, as you can see on the other side here, the web server receives those JSP files and process it. As you can see, we have, for example, these JSP's server engines. This one is normally used to the JSP files are stored in this engine. So it's going to process the pages from JSP and interpret it, and definitely going to look for an extension which ends with JSP.JSP. And then processing, and you can see you can connect to the database where we get the data from. So that is it. So let's talk about that. That was roughly. So let's explain this in a little bit in a better way that you guys, apprentices, you can understand. Don't be afraid if you don't get anything that I'm saying right now. But sometimes when you start something new, at first it's gonna be a little bit challenging, but as time goes by, it's going to work. So let's talk about this JSP processing. So we have steps where the web server creates a web page using JSP. So the first process here is that, as with the normal pages, you can browse. Your browser sends an HTTP request to a web server, right? And then the second procedure or process, the web server recognizes the HTTP request in the actually the request is for JSP page and forward it to a JSP engine. This is done by using the URL of JSP page which ends with .jsp instead of .html. So the engine for JSP is going to recognize only the part which ends with .jsp. The third process is that the JSP engine loads the JSP page from the disk and convert it into a servlet content. you see, we have a JSP and also we have Servlet. These are kind of pages, files which works in harmony. For example, a JSP has to pass the request to the Servlet, and the Servlet is more of the core Java code. So the JSP engine just loads the JSP pages from the disk and convert it into a Servlet content. So this conversion is very simple, in which all the temporary text is converted to print in statement, and all the JSP elements are converted to Java code. So that's the function of a Servlet. All the content from a JSP page is converted into a Servlet content. So this code implements the corresponding dynamic behavior of the page. Another thing, the JSP engine compiles the Servlet into an executable class and forward the original request to the Servlet engine. So it has to take those the JSP files and then process it like making it as a Servlet classes. Then once they conclude with the result, and then it sends back to JSP page. So that is it. So another part is that the part of the web server called the Servlet engine loads the Servlet class and executes it. So once the request is received from JSP page, it passes to the Servlet, and the Servlet process it and then execute it. So during execution, the Servlet produces an output in HTML format. So when it gives back in a HTML format. So the output is further passed on the web server by the Servlet engine inside the HTTP response. Cool, that was a really long story. But lastly but not least, the web server forwards the HTTP response to your browser, you as a class, in terms of a static HTML content. And lastly or finally, the web browser handles the dynamic generated HTML page inside HTTP response exactly as if it was a static page. So you can think of this as a tunnel where you are passing data. So from the JSP, just there is a tunnel. We can say the tunnel is HTTP protocols. Then it passes to a Servlet, and the Servlet change those JSP file into a Servlet code, which almost look like the core Java code. And then it processes it back, and when it processes back, it gives back as HTML files, and then this can now be displayed as a static, or so that is all about these processes. And as you can see, our figure here, or this drawing of mine, and you can see the process. So all the above mentioned steps can be seen in this diagram of mine here, whereby the client just send the request, and then the server just receives the response as a get. The client actually just do post on the server, and the server gets the files. So the server it has got the JSP container, and then it processes it and then give it back to, actually it uses the servlet.java to process everything that is in there, and then it compiles, and then it execute back, and then get back to the Servlet again, and then from the server it passes back to the client. That is all the procedure. So typically the JSP engine checks to see whether a Servlet for a JSP file already exists, and whether the modification data on the JSP is older than the Servlet. So it has to check whether the files that is gotten from the JSP page is older or newer than the one that is inside the server. So if it's the newer one, it's going to process and give a dynamic exactly on that time. But if it's an old, it's not going to process that. So that's another way of explaining this. So if the JSP is older than its generated Servlet, the JSP container assumes that JSP hasn't changed and that the generated servlet still matches the JSP contents. So this makes the process more efficient than with other scripting languages like PHP, and therefore faster. So JSP, building a web application with JSP is more faster than another language. So that is the greatest thing to do with JSP. So in a way, a JSP page is really just another way to write a servlet without having to be a Java programming wizard. So you don't have really to understand Java, but with servlets you can be able to write those codes, and yeah, that is it. So except for maybe translation phase, and JSP page is handled exactly like a regular servlet, so there's no different about that. So guys, I think I've talked a lot more about that because, and I've decided that today I'm just going to explain before we get into the code side. So let's talk about what else do you need to hear before we go or we get serious. So let's talk about the JSP lifecycle. So you see, these JSP files have a life cycle. They can actually at a particular time they just, let's say, they are get written off. You understand that? So in this lesson we will discuss the life cycle of JSP, and the key to understand the low level functionality of JSP is to understand the symbol life cycle, the way they follow. So a JSP life cycle is defined as the process from its creation till the destruction. So this is similar to a servlet life cycle with an additional step which is required to compile a JSP file into a servlet. So guys, don't be worried, because the class of day I'm just going to talk and talk, because you need to get a little of things, a little of tips there before we start. But at least you need to understand what actually happens between here. So that's what I'm trying to explain, though I might not explain perfectly, but hope that the message is gotten. So let's talk about paths followed by a JSP. So I have like 4 of these paths followed, and the first one is a compilation, and the second one is initialization, and the third one is execution, and the fourth one is a cleanup. So it has to be compiled, initialized, and executed, and then once it's executed, let's clean this and up and wait for the next maybe request. So the 4 major phases of JSP lifecycle are very similar to the servlet lifecycle. So you might be worried why I'm talking about JSP and the servlet. Actually, JSP is written on, I can say that it's written on a HTML document, because it has almost the same. We can apply actually the HTML element on a JSP there. So we can also, in this JSP file, we can use Java code there, and those Java codes are called JSP. But also we can have a servlet, pure servlet, where we don't have any HTML element there. So again, we have we use the same protocol, that is HTTPS. So but there is no HTML there. That's the difference. But it's easier to process things in a servlet other than a JSP, because you need to load, compile, all that stuff. So, but servlets, I can say servlets almost purely Java there. So the 4 phases have been described in my picture here, you can see. So I have initialization, and then we have a JSP initialization here. That's how then it drops down to a JSP servlets. So this is when the data from a JSP page is passed down to in a service, JSP service. So from then the JSP service, you can see it's going to be, the third one is going to be destroyed, and yeah, so that is it. I just hope that you can see this figure over here and rate how these things are done. Okay, so let's talk about JSP compilation. So when a browser asks for a JSP, and the JSP engine first checks to see whether it needs to compile the page. If the page has never been compiled, or if the JSP has been modified since it was last compiled, the JSP engine compiles the page. So the compilation process involves 3 steps. That is actually passing at the JSP files, then turning the JSP files into a servlet. So remember, it has to pass through the servlet to get into maybe a database, or yeah, actually it can get to the database, and then compiling the servlet. So that is it. So you compile the servlet. So let's talk about JSP initialization. So when a container loads a JSP, it invokes the JSP initialization method before serving any request. If you need to perform a JSP specific initialization, then we override the JSP initialization method like this one here. I think I can write something here and say it should be inside this quote here. Remember, this one has no server, so this is just for demonstration. This is just for demonstrating. So for example, we have this something like public, which is this one here, and void, and so we have this method which is called, it's actually inbuilt, which is called JSP initialization. So first it's initialized, so it has to be initialized like this. This is the first method is going to be met. Control Z, just like this. So initialization of code, this way is done. So typically initialization is performed only once and as with the servlet initialize method. So initialization, as I've already said, is performed only once and as with the servlet initialize method. So you generally initialize database connection, open files, and create lookup tables in JSP.initialization method. Yeah, so let's talk about JSP execution. So in this phase of a JSP lifecycle, represent all interaction with the request until the JSP is destroyed. So whenever a browser requests a JSP and the page has been loaded and initialized, the JSP engine invokes the JSP service method in the JSP. So first, when the request is sent, it's initialized, and then once it's initialized, now the JSP engine will invoke the JSP service method in the JSP, which actually going to handle the request and the response. For example, okay, let me just finish this. I hope to open my application here that I'm still working on, so that you can see actually what I'm saying. So it's just loading. Let this Eclipse load as we wait as I explain. So as I was saying, the JSP service method takes an HTTP servlet request and an HTTP servlet response as its parameter, as for example followed like this. Is how it does actually. So this is the first method that I've done here, and we have this one here, void, underscore. Maybe you can put some underscore. These are actually inbuilt, so you don't have to worry about this, because once you create that file, the processing and everything is just you just forget about that, but you will write the code for that. You don't need to put this. These are actually naturally, these are the methods which are inbuilt. So once you create a page, it's going to be there for you, just like that. So this is JSP, and we call it service. So it's going to service the request and the response. So it's simple like that. So it's going to handle the HTTP. Actually, it should be HTTP service. Actually, this is the servlet. So it's servlet. Servlet are those Java codes within a JSP page. Those are the ones which are called servlets. So request, and you don't have to write this because they are automatically there. So request, just like that. And then we have another one here. Hope this one is almost open. And we have this one which is http servlet again, but now this one is not request but a response, because these are going to be received as the parameter. These are the one which are going to have your data from maybe a form of from the HTML form or the JSP form. So this is where your data is going to be carried. This is the tunnel, you see. So servlet response, just like this, and this is now the response. Just like that. So the code will go inside here and then process your request. So I'm just going to show you an example here. This is an online system, an online shopping system that I'm doing, and I just want to show you a single thing here. Let me just open here. This is just to show you what actually happens. So I'm just going to click here at the source, open that. You see the web pages are here. So I just want to show you the signup.action. The signup.action. Actually, do you see the response here? Actually, now this is the JSP page. If we had a servlet here, let me show you a servlet. I think let me just open my another platform that I have here, which is this one here. Let me just open this so that you can see servlet. So I have JSP. Where are my servlets? Actually, they should be somewhere here. They are here. So let me just check for the controller servlet package. So register, for example, this one here. So guys, you can see this is a servlet, and you can see here public register servlet extend HTTP servlet. So these are their servlets, and it receives the request from, let me show you the index here. Index. So you see this is a JSP page. So in this form, and I have a form here. Hold on. Yeah, you see, we have this action which is sent to the register servlet, and this is the register servlet. So I received the data from the form here, and once I receive it, comes to register.servlet to process what is being sent from the form. So in the request here, register here, as you can see, I received them as a HTTP servlet.request and HTTP servlet.response. So I got the response, and then this is where I did my. So you can see I got the parameter from the HTTP protocols, and I can now process down here. So forget about this, but this is just for demonstration to show you what actually happened between the JSP and the servlet. So hope guys you have grasped some, but let me just finish off by just saying the JSP services method, it's an inbuilt method of JSP in a JSP engine, and it's invoked on request basis. So this is responsible for generating the response for that request, and this method is also responsible for generating response to all 7 of the HTTP method, which is get, post, delete, update, or do. So you can understand that. So let's talk about finally the JSP cleanup. So the destruction phase of the JSP lifecycle represents when a JSP is being removed from use by a container. So the JSP.destroy method is the JSP equivalent of a destroy method for servlets. So this actually override JSP destroy when you need to perform any cleanup. So such as freezing database connection or closing open files. So it's simple. So these are the main methods that are inbuilt in a JSP container. So let me show you this last one here, which is, I don't know what I'm doing here. So we have this also, which is, you don't have, I've already explained to you, you don't have to worry with this because these are inbuilt. Once you create a file, it's there. So they're going to process your thing before you get it, because it's just a protocol. So if I have to explain this, then you have to go back to HTTP protocols and you get to understand what actually happens. But for this, it's enough for now. So this is public for JSP destroy method, destroy method, which destroys once something time is gone. So and then the code goes in there. So you need to remember about these few methods. And guys, I can say that for today, as I said, we were to talk a lot more, but so at least we have learned about the architecture and the life cycle. So in the next class, guys, we will talk about the syntax in JSP. So hope that you will join the next class for syntax. Welcome once again, is your guy, the Wolf. So goodbye.